The day Vivian's new husband walked into the private lounge at First Pacific Meridian Bank and told me, to my face, that I should cut ties with his wife because I was a struggling musician who had no business being in the same room as men like him, I smiled. I smiled because I had been waiting 9 years for a moment exactly like this. I smiled because the account number printed on the folder in front of me represented $500 million. Every single cent of it sitting in the bank where Vivian was now chief financial officer. And I smiled because in about 60 seconds, I was going to stand up from that chair, shake his hand, and walk every dollar out the door forever. But before I tell you what happened in that room, I need to take you back to the beginning, because you need to understand who I was before any of this. You need to understand what Vivian said to me the night she left. And you need to understand how a man goes from sleeping on a friend's couch in Nashville to controlling a $500 million portfolio, while everyone who wrote him off was watching from the outside. If this is your first time here, welcome. And if you've been with this channel for a while, you already know we don't do filtered, comfortable stories. We do real ones. Before we go any further, hit that subscribe button right now. Drop a comment below telling me what you think Vivian's husband said when I stood up to leave. And if this story hits you the way I think it's going to, like this video. It helps more people find us. Now let's get into it. My name is Sterling. I'm 41 years old. I grew up in a small town called Gallatin, Tennessee, about 30 miles northeast of Nashville. My father drove a delivery truck for 32 years. My mother taught second grade at the same elementary school from the time I was born until the year she retired. We were not poor. We were also not comfortable. We were the family that understood exactly what money was because we felt its absence every single month when the bills came in. Music was the thing that saved me as a kid, not in a cliché way, in a practical way. I was bad at sports, I was average in school, and I had no particular gift for anything that would make a father proud in a conventional sense. But I could hear things. I could sit at a piano and pull out something I'd heard one time on the radio and make it sound like I'd been practicing it for years. My mother noticed when I was 7. By the time I was 12, I was playing at church every Sunday morning. By the time I was 16, I was playing at weddings and local events and making more money per weekend than my classmates made all summer at their summer jobs. I didn't go to college. That was the first decision that defined everything that came after. My father thought I was making the worst mistake of his life. My mother cried. But I had a plan, or at least I thought I did. I moved to Nashville at 18 with $4,000 saved, a second-hand guitar, and the kind of certainty that only teenagers are capable of feeling. For 3 years, I played every bar, every open mic, every session gig I could find. I wrote songs for other artists, mostly country, some crossover pop, and I got very good at understanding what made a song commercially viable, not just emotionally resonant, but structurally, rhythmically, commercially designed to work. That distinction matters. A lot of musicians can move you. Fewer can move you and also make a producer write a check. I was starting to be one of the ones who could do both. That was when I met Vivian. She was 24. I was 23. She was working at the downtown Nashville branch of Cumberland Valley Financial, a mid-sized regional bank, as a junior analyst. She was everything I wasn't. Organized, credential forward. She had a finance degree from Vanderbilt, a 5-year plan written out in a leather notebook she kept in her purse, and an accent that made her sound like she'd grown up somewhere more refined than she actually had. We met at a friend's birthday dinner at a restaurant on Broadway. I remember she laughed at something I said and then immediately looked surprised that she'd laughed, like she hadn't expected me to be funny. We talked for 3 hours while everyone else drifted in and out of the conversation around us. By the end of the night, I had her number. For 2 years, we were the kind of couple that people look at and think, how does that work? She was structured. I was spontaneous. She had quarterly financial goals. I had song ideas written on napkins all over my apartment. She wore blazers to her weekends. I wore whatever I'd slept in. But it worked, the way things work when two people are genuinely curious about each other's world and genuinely willing to learn from it. We got married in the spring. Small ceremony. Her parents came from Charlotte. Mine drove up from Gallatin. We had a reception at a venue near the Gulch with about 60 people, a band I knew from the session circuit, and a photographer who owed me a favor. For the first 2 years of our marriage, things were good. Not perfect, but good. I was working constantly, writing sessions, live gigs, small licensing deals for commercials and TV shows. Vivian was moving up at the bank. She got a promotion. Then another one. She started talking about her trajectory in ways that were specific and ambitious and impressive. She knew exactly what she wanted, and she was building toward it with the patience and discipline of someone who had studied the map for years. I admired her for it. I also started to notice something. The more successful Vivian became, the quieter I felt around her colleagues. Her world was changing. The dinners were different now. These were not birthday parties on Broadway. These were dinners at places in Green Hills where the bill came in a leather folder and nobody looked at it. The conversations were about portfolios, mergers, institutional relationships, regional market positioning. I could hold my own for a while, but then someone would ask me what I was working on, and I'd say something like, "I'm finishing a spec record for a singer-songwriter out of Austin," and I could see the slight recalibration in their eyes. Not cruelty, just filing. Musician, creative type, not quite our world. Vivian never said anything directly. That's the thing about the kind of diminishment that happens in a marriage. It doesn't usually announce itself. It seeps. I started noticing that she introduced me differently depending on who we were around. At industry events, she'd say, "This is my husband Sterling. He's a songwriter." With a brightness that always felt slightly performative, like she was trying to make the word songwriter sound more impressive than it registered. At dinner parties with her colleagues, there were nights she'd introduce me and then sort of continue the conversation she'd been having before I arrived, folding me in rather than presenting me. I told myself I was being sensitive. Then one night, 4.5 years into our marriage, she sat down across from me at our kitchen table in the house we were renting in East Nashville, and she said something I have thought about almost every day since. "Sterling, I need you to be honest with me. What is this actually going to look like in 10 years? Because I need to plan, and I can't plan around a question mark." I looked at her for a long time. "I'm not a question mark," I said. "I know you're not, but your income is." She said it gently. That was almost the worst part. She wasn't being cruel. She had opened a spreadsheet, literally. On her laptop, right there at the table. Our combined income for the past 4 years. My licensing deals, session income, a small publishing advance I'd received the year prior. Her salary trajectory, the gap between them widening. "This is a business analysis," I said. "Our life is a business, Sterling. I'm not saying that to be cold. I'm saying that because I've been watching what happens to people who don't treat it that way." We stayed married for another year after that conversation, but it had changed something in the room between us. A door had opened that was too honest to close again. She filed the paperwork the following spring. She wasn't unkind about it. There were no dramatic scenes, no accusations, no lawyers sending nasty letters. Vivian was many things, but she was not theatrical. She divided what little we had fairly, she wished me well sincerely, and she walked out of East Nashville and into whatever she had already been building toward. I sat in that house. Our house. Now just my house, soon to be nobody's house. And I felt something I hadn't expected. Not devastation, not rage. Clarity. Let me tell you what happened to me in the 18 months after. Vivian left because this is the part that most people get wrong when they hear this story. They assume I fell apart. I didn't. I rebuilt. I kept working. I wasn't sleeping on anyone's couch. I need to correct that. I moved to a small apartment off Dickerson Pike. I cut every expense down to the bone, and I went back to doing what I was actually good at, writing. I wrote every single day, not out of inspiration, out of discipline. The way Vivian had taught me, without knowing she was teaching me, that consistency is the architecture of success. 6 months after the divorce, I connected with a music supervisor named Adrian Whitfield through a mutual contact. Adrian placed music in film and television, major networks, prestige streaming platforms, international co-productions. He heard 3 of my tracks, said almost nothing, and then called me a week later with an offer for a licensing deal that made my eyes go wide. It wasn't the money that changed things, though it helped. It was what the deal represented. It was proof of concept. 1 deal became 5. 5 became 12. I hired an entertainment attorney named Gloria Reyes out of Los Angeles, who was sharp and connected, and who started structuring my deals in ways I hadn't understood were possible. Publishing rights, back-end royalties, sync fees with performance clauses. The architecture of income in the music business, when you understand it and when you have someone fighting for you inside it, is genuinely remarkable. I want to be specific about this because I think the way success gets described in stories like mine is usually dishonest. People say, "I worked hard and things turned around," and they skip the 2 years in the middle where nothing turned around and you were just grinding in a room by yourself wondering if you'd made the right call. So let me be specific. Year 1 after the divorce, 4 licensing deals. Total income from those, combined with session work and a live gig run I did through Kentucky and Ohio, came to roughly $148,000. That was significantly more than any single year during my marriage, but it was also the year I had the most expenses: the apartment, the attorney's retainer, equipment upgrades, health insurance that I was now covering independently. I broke even. That was the goal. Year 2, I signed with Adrian's firm properly. Not just individual placements, but a representation agreement that gave his team the right to pitch my catalog to any production looking for music in a specific emotional register. I had built enough of a body of work by then, close to 300 original compositions across different genres, different tempos, different moods, that the catalog itself had commercial value independent of any single deal. Year 2 income nearly doubled. Year 3, the first significant television placement. A drama on a major streaming platform used one of my instrumental pieces as the recurring motif for a character across an entire season, 8 episodes. The sync fee was substantial, the back-end royalties were more substantial. I remember the night the first royalty statement came in for that one piece, and I sat at my kitchen table for a long time doing math and then doing it again, because I didn't believe the first result. Gloria, my attorney, sat down with me that year and said something I have quoted to other people more times than I can count. "Sterling, you are now at the point where your biggest risk is not making enough money. Your biggest risk is not understanding the money you're making. Let's fix that." She connected me with a CPA in Nashville who specialized in entertainment royalty structures and a financial planner named Tobias Reed, who had worked for years in the country music business managing portfolios for artists and behind-the-scenes talent. Tobias was the one who introduced me to Declan, my cousin in private equity, and Declan was the one who started talking to me about what wealth actually meant at scale. Within 4 years of the divorce, I had accumulated more money than I had earned in the entire previous decade combined. Within 6 years, I was working with investment advisors in Nashville and New York. A cousin of mine, Declan, who had gone into private equity, connected me with a wealth management firm. I started to understand, for the first time, what it meant to own money rather than earn it. Within 8 years, the portfolio was significant. Serious enough that financial institutions were competing for my business. Serious enough that I was having meetings in private lounges, not waiting rooms. And in year 9, I opened an account at First Pacific Meridian Bank. Because First Pacific Meridian Bank was now where Vivian worked. Because Vivian was now the CFO. I need to be honest with you about something. I want to tell you the account was purely strategic, that it was coincidence. But that would be dishonest. Part of it, a real part of it, was that I wanted to know what it felt like. To sit across from a relationship manager in a bank that my ex-wife ran and hand over a portfolio summary that represented everything she had once decided I was not capable of building. I didn't know what would happen. I didn't have a plan beyond the account. I wasn't trying to manufacture anything, but I also wasn't naive enough to think nothing would happen. I didn't see Vivian for the first 3 months. My relationship at the bank was with a private wealth advisor named Preston Cole, who was sharp and professional and excellent at his job. I went to the office on West End Avenue in Nashville for our quarterly reviews. It was a beautiful building. Marble lobby, understated signage, the kind of place that communicated wealth by pretending not to care about it. The 4th time I came in, Vivian was in the lobby. She was coming out of a conference room with 2 people I didn't recognize, talking about something with the focused energy she'd always had. She saw me and stopped. For a moment, neither of us spoke. "Sterling," she said. "Vivian." She looked genuinely good. Composed, confident, a different kind of polish than she'd been in Nashville in our 20s. She was wearing something well-cut and simple, and she looked like someone who understood exactly where she was in a building and exactly how she'd gotten there. "Preston's working with you?" she said. It wasn't a question exactly. "He is. He's excellent," she said. Good choice. We talked for maybe 4 minutes in that lobby. It was courteous, professional. There was no emotional wreckage, no performance of either hostility or false warmth. We were two adults with a shared past who were capable of being in the same room. I walked out and sat in my car in the parking structure for 10 minutes, just letting myself feel whatever it was I was feeling, which was less dramatic than I'd anticipated. Mostly, I just felt strange, the way you feel when something you've been expecting finally arrives. I met her husband 3 months later. His name was Bradford Holt III. I want you to picture the name before I describe him, because the name does a lot of the work. Bradford Holt III. He was 47, silver-haired in a way that had been strategically maintained, the kind of tall that takes up a room by default. He had made his money in commercial real estate development, primarily in Nashville and Charlotte and Atlanta. And he wore that money the way some men wear watches. Prominently, deliberately, as a primary form of communication. He had married Vivian 2 years after our divorce. I knew about it through mutual connections. Nashville is not a small town, but the world within Nashville that overlaps with finance and music licensing is genuinely small. I had heard he was the kind of man who told you his square footage within the first 10 minutes of meeting you. Our first meeting was entirely accidental. Preston had invited me to a client appreciation event at the bank, a Thursday evening reception at the office, drinks and light catering, meet the team sort of thing. I almost didn't go. I went because Gloria, my attorney, told me that showing up to these things matters when you're managing a portfolio at this level and you want institutional relationships, not just transactional ones. Bradford was there because he was Vivian's husband and Vivian was the CFO and this was her bank's event. He introduced himself to me at the appetizer table. Firm handshake, eyes that cataloged me quickly. Bradford Holt, he said. And you're Sterling what? Sterling Malone, I said. Malone. What do you do, Sterling? Music, I said. Licensing, publishing. The micro-expression was brief but legible. Ah, the music guy. Filing happening in real time. Right, he said. I didn't realize First Pacific did a lot of business with creative people. He said creative people the way someone says amateur athletes. Technically neutral, not actually neutral. They do when the numbers are right, I said. He smiled. We shook hands. We went our separate ways into the event. I didn't think much more about it that night. The second meeting was different. 2 months after the reception, I was in for my regular quarterly meeting with Preston. We sat in one of the private rooms off the main floor. Glass walls, low light. A table long enough for 8 people, but just the 2 of us. We were going through portfolio performance, discussing allocation adjustments, the usual conversation. The door opened. Bradford Holt walked in. Preston looked up, slightly surprised. Mr. Holt, we're in the middle of a client session. I know, Bradford said. He wasn't looking at Preston. He was looking at me. I wanted a moment. Preston glanced at me. I nodded slightly. Preston excused himself and stepped out. Bradford sat down in the chair Preston had vacated. He placed his hands flat on the table like a man who is comfortable commanding tables. I'll be direct, he said. I know who you are. I know you were married to Vivian, and I'm going to be honest with you. I think there's an inherent awkwardness in having you as a client at this institution. I said nothing. Vivian is a professional, he continued. She's handled the situation with complete integrity. But I don't think it serves anyone well to have her ex-husband in her bank, in her building, with an account that, whatever its size, keeps bringing you back here on a regular basis. Are you speaking on behalf of the bank? I asked. I'm speaking as her husband. Then this is a personal conversation, I said, not a professional one. You can call it what you want, he said. I'm asking you to consider taking your business elsewhere. There are excellent institutions in Nashville. You don't need to be here. I looked at him for a long moment. What do you think I do for a living? I asked. He smiled again, that same smile from the appetizer table. You're in music. Licensing, you said, which is admirable. Creative work matters. But this is a different world, Sterling. The people who use private wealth services at this level, it's not typically, how much do you think my account is worth? I asked. Something shifted in his face, a slight recalibration. I don't have visibility into client accounts, he said. I know you don't, I said, but I'm asking you to guess. He said nothing. Because if you knew, I said, I don't think you'd be in this room. I stood up. I picked up the folder Preston had left on the table, the quarterly review, the allocation summaries, everything, and I held it for a moment. I appreciate you being direct, I said. So let me be direct back. I'm going to step outside and speak with Preston, and then I'm going to tell Preston that I'd like to begin the process of closing this account and transferring my assets to another institution. Not because I was asked to, because I've decided that a bank where the CFO's husband feels entitled to walk into client meetings and tell people to take their money elsewhere isn't a bank that understands what it's actually holding. Bradford looked at me. For the first time, something that wasn't confidence appeared on his face. How large is the account? He said. Ask your wife, I said. She's the CFO. I need to tell you what was in the room in that moment, because I want you to feel it the way I felt it. Bradford Holt sat across from me in a chair that cost more than my first car. He was wearing a suit that communicated exactly what it was designed to communicate, that he was a man who occupied spaces like this one naturally, by birthright almost, and that my presence was the anomaly requiring explanation. The light in the room was that particular blue-white light that private banking offices use, designed to make everything feel precise and controlled. On the table between us was the quarterly review folder with my name on it and Preston's careful analysis of the past 12 months of performance inside it. Bradford didn't know what was in that folder. That was the entire problem. He had walked into this room with a complete picture of the situation that was missing its most important fact, and he had built his whole approach, the directness, the authority, the subtle condescension wrapped in, the language of professional concern, on an incomplete foundation. He thought he was managing a minor complication. He thought he was the kind of man who could walk into rooms and resolve things. He was right that he was that kind of man. He was wrong about what he was resolving. How large is the account? He said. Ask your wife, I said. She's the CFO. I walked out. Preston was waiting in the hallway. His expression told me he'd understood more than he'd let on. I want to initiate a transfer, I said. Full account. I'll need the paperwork. Preston closed his eyes briefly. When he opened them, they were the eyes of a man calculating a significant professional loss. Sterling, I want to be clear. This conversation with Bradford Holt was not sanctioned by the bank. What he did was completely inappropriate. I know, I said. This isn't punitive toward you. You've been excellent. But I can't stay in a building where I'm being managed by someone who isn't on my team. He nodded. We walked to his office. He pulled up the account. When the total appeared on his screen, he went very still. $512 million, he said quietly. It wasn't a question. Yes, I said. We sat in silence for a moment. Bradford didn't know, Preston said. No, I said. He thought I was a struggling musician. I want to tell you what happened after I left, because this story doesn't end in the parking garage. Preston called me the following morning. The bank's president, a woman named Harriet Knowles, wanted to speak with me personally. She was apologetic, direct, and genuinely distressed, not at me, but at what had happened. She told me Bradford Holt had no institutional role at First Pacific Meridian and had acted entirely without authorization. She offered significant incentives to retain the account. She was professional, and she was sincere. I appreciated her call. I still transferred the account. Not out of anger, out of principle. Because the moment someone treats your presence in a room as a burden rather than an asset, the math of staying doesn't work anymore. You can't unknow what a room thinks of you. The money moved to a private wealth management firm in Brentwood, a boutique operation called Callaway and Pine that handled accounts of similar scale with a discretion I found immediately more comfortable. What I heard happen next, I heard from 3 separate people in the Nashville finance world over the following 2 months. Bradford Holt's commercial real estate portfolio had been quietly carrying significant debt for about 18 months, over-leveraged positions in the Atlanta market that had not performed the way his projections had suggested. He had been in conversations with First Pacific Meridian about extended credit facilities. Those conversations, I was told, became significantly more complicated after the account transfer. When an institution loses $500 million, and the proximate cause is the CFO's husband, the conversations about credit extensions take on a different tone. I don't know the specific details of what happened inside that bank. I won't claim certainty I don't have. But I know that within 4 months of my transfer, Bradford Holt III was no longer attending First Pacific Meridian Bank events. And I know that Vivian, who is a genuinely excellent financial mind, was navigating a professionally complicated period. I didn't manufacture any of that. I just withdrew what was mine. There is something I want to say about Vivian, because I think it matters for this story to be complete and honest. About 6 months after the account transfer, she called me. It was a Sunday afternoon in early November. I was at my house in the Hillsborough Village neighborhood. I'd bought a place there the previous year, a restored Craftsman with a recording studio built into the basement, and her name appeared on my phone like a message from a different decade of my life. I answered. "I heard what happened," she said, "with Bradford in the meeting." "Okay," I said. "I want you to know I didn't know he was going to do that. I would never have asked him to do that." "I know," I said. "That conversation had his fingerprints all over it. Not yours." There was a pause. "I owe you an apology," she said. "Not about Bradford. About something older than Bradford." I waited. "The spreadsheet," she said. I felt something move in my chest. After 9 years, she remembered the exact thing that had mattered. "I treated your work like a variable when I should have treated it like a value," she said. "You were building something real. I just couldn't see the shape of it from where I was standing." "You weren't wrong about the math at the time," I said honestly. "The numbers were what they were." "The numbers weren't the whole story," she said. "I knew that. I just chose the cleaner analysis." We talked for about 20 minutes. It was not a reconciliation conversation. I want to be clear about that. We were not two people finding their way back to something. We were two people finding a way to be honest with each other from across the distance of everything that had happened. Before we hung up, she said something I've thought about many times since. "You built something incredible, Sterling. I mean that without any complication attached to it. I'm proud of you the way you would be proud of someone you once knew very well." "I learned some of it from watching you," I said. And that was true. Here's what I know now that I didn't know when I was sitting in that apartment off Dickerson Pike after the divorce, eating cold rice and wondering what I'd do next. Success is not revenge. I need to say that clearly because there is a version of this story where Sterling uses his money to humiliate the people who underestimated him and calls it justice. That's not what happened. What happened is that I kept working and eventually the work was worth something that other people could measure. Bradford Holt didn't lose anything because I wanted him to lose it. He lost things because of decisions he had already made about debt and leverage that had nothing to do with me. I was just the variable that removed a piece of his foundation's support at an inconvenient time. Vivian didn't lose anything. Vivian is still the CFO of First Pacific Meridian Bank. Vivian built something real too, her way, with her tools. I don't carry any resentment about the divorce anymore. I'm not sure I did for very long. The spreadsheet hurt in the moment because it reduced something I couldn't yet prove to a number I didn't yet have. But she wasn't wrong that a plan requires certainty. She just had a different tolerance for uncertainty than I did. The thing that changed me, the thing I actually want you to take away from this story, is the period after the divorce, not the moment in the bank. The 18 months when nobody was watching. When there was no dramatic reveal coming and no one to prove anything to. When it was just me in a small apartment writing every day, trusting that the work was building toward something even though I couldn't see the shape of it yet. That's where the $500 million actually came from. Not from talent, from showing up every single day in a room where nobody was applauding. Bradford Holt called me once. It was about 8 months after the bank meeting. I don't know how he got my personal number. Nashville, again, is genuinely small in the ways that matter. It was a Tuesday morning and I was having coffee at a place on 12th Avenue South when the call came in from a number I didn't recognize. "Sterling," he said when I answered. His voice was different. The boardroom authority was gone. What was underneath it was something more human and frankly more interesting. "Bradford," I said. "I owe you an apology," he said. "What I did in that meeting was wrong, professionally and personally." I thought about several things I could say. I chose the simplest one. "I appreciate you saying that," I said. "I want you to know it wasn't about the money. I didn't know about the account. I know, I said. That was evident. A pause. What was it about? I asked, because I genuinely wanted to understand. He was quiet for a moment. I suppose I thought you were a problem I could solve cleanly, he said. Vivian never talked about you negatively. That bothered me more than if she had. That was the most honest thing he'd said in any conversation we'd had. She's an excellent person, I said. She always was. Yeah, he said. She is. We didn't talk for much longer. There was nothing left to resolve, really. He'd been a man who thought he understood a situation and walked into a room to manage it, and discovered he'd been wrong about the fundamental premise. That happens to people. What you do afterward says more about you than the original mistake. I haven't spoken to him since. I don't wish him harm. I don't think about him very often. He's a chapter, not a through line. I'm writing this from the studio in the basement of my house in Hillsborough Village. There are 3 Grammy nominations on the wall above the board. 2 as a songwriter, 1 as a producer. There's a framed photo from a licensing deal for a film that won at Sundance 3 years ago. There are notebooks everywhere. Still, some things don't change. The portfolio is different now. Not always larger. Markets move, allocations shift. Real wealth is more complicated than a single number on a single day. But it's substantial, and it's real, and it was built by someone who kept going in rooms where nobody believed anything was happening. That's the only story I know how to tell. Sometimes the person who wrote you off was doing math on a version of you that no longer existed. Sometimes the person who looked at your life and saw a question mark just couldn't see what you were building yet. And sometimes a man in a very nice suit walks into a room to tell you to leave, and you get to stand up slowly and pick up your folder and say with complete sincerity, "Ask your wife how much you just cost this building, because she's the CFO and she already knows."